All right, we'd like to thank Professor Sachs and Hans Vestberg from ERICSSON for that great conversation, and Stefan as well. And in fact, we'll ask Hans Vestberg, ERICSSON CEO, to join us again for the next conversation. We certainly can't say that ERICSSON is shying away from some of the world's biggest challenges. Hans is going to join us moving from education to refugees. And I would like to also, second Henry Timms from the 92nd Street Y's thanks to ERICSSON for joining us. They've been fantastic partners, sponsors, and as Henry indicated, even really committed to what the Social Good Summit is all about. And I think you saw that from Hans's last conversation, and certainly we'll see that again with this one. Joining Hans are the UN's High Commissioner for Refugees, António Guterres, the co-founder of Refugees United, Christopher Mikkelsen, and our moderator is Satinder Bindra of the UN Development Program. This amazing group of experts will discuss working with and connecting the world's 43 million displaced persons, which then enables better service delivery and better lives for those displaced. Please welcome this distinguished panel.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for being here. And I'll turn to António first. 750,000 people at risk. There's famine in Somalia, a country with no stable government. You've been there. Tell us a story that places this tragedy in some perspective.
Well, visiting Doloado, which is a refugee camp in Ethiopia, I met a certain number of people, but I particularly remember one lady. She had just come from Somalia, and I asked her, how long did it take you to come? And said, I walked for 2 weeks. How many children do we have? He said, I started with 6, but 3 died on the way. Now, unfortunately, this is a common story. And you have lots of people that, because of famine in Somalia and because of the conflict that didn't allow aid to be provided to the people where they live, had to flee in the most dramatic circumstances. Many were killed, many were raped, many lost their families. And when we look at the situation in Doloado, we had levels of malnutrition for children and levels of mortality rates for children that were absolutely appalling, unparalleled in history of humanitarian action. So indeed, the level of suffering, of course, the figures are enormous. We are talking about 900,000 refugees from Somalia in the 4 countries around, more than 1 million people displaced inside Somalia. But each one of these is a dramatic situation with an amount of suffering that is absolutely appalling. And it is why it is so important to look into these people and to provide everything we can using technology to empower them, to help them connect. They have lost their families. They are alone in the world. They need support, and technology is one of the most important instruments we have to mitigate their plight.
Well, there's technology, and technology, Hans, must also come, I guess, with a generous helping of hope, because technology alone perhaps sometimes may not be able to do it. Would it?
No, I think that the importance here, and of course I share in the griefs of the refugees. They're on the road for a long time before they come to a refugee camp, and long time before they find also the place to settle in maybe. But what we have seen, which I think that the first time when we sort of build a network close to a refugee camp, we saw something that we never thought was possible, an enormously high penetration of mobile phones in a refugee camp. And that, I mean, we had that experience, and we start thinking, these people are refugees and they are walking long times and they have no food, nothing, and it was probably not the first thing we thought about, that they would have a lot of mobile phones and the penetration quite high. But that's what we saw when we start setting up mobile networks close to refugee camps. And then, of course, you start thinking about there is a lot of things you can do and support with technology. You cannot help them with food. That is very difficult with technology, and that's the first thing that they need. But there's a lot of other information that can be catered for. You can identify yourself with the phone and a lot of things like that. So yes, there is a huge potential of using technology in order to support these people that are on a very difficult path in life.
Yes, and it's something that perhaps we overlook, that in large parts of Africa, the connectivity is actually very good. And the cell phone has become almost ubiquitous. Christopher, you work and you set up a co-founder of a refugee organization. Do you think technology is the answer, that it can quickly sort of help? We've just heard from António how many families were displaced, and is this something that can bring families together and quickly?
Yeah, I think technology plays a crucial role for refugees. It's not the answer for everything, but technology in the case of Refugees United is alpha omega. What we provide is essentially a mobile phone-driven network that assists organizations such as the UNHCR, the Red Cross, and others in helping refugees sign up with information about themselves so they can reconnect with family members they've lost contact with during their escape from various conflicts, droughts, and so on and so forth. Now, ERICSSON, again here in this case, have been instrumental in helping Refugees United develop the platforms that we use and getting them up and running in these often very hostile and difficult environments.
Let's role play for a moment if we could, António. Let's take the case of another camp. You described one. There's a camp in Kenya called Dadaab, in which there's an estimated 400,000 refugees there now. You go there.
It's the third city in Kenya today.
Yes.
450,000 people.
450,000. What's now arguably described as the largest refugee camp in the world. You go there on a visit, on a field trip, and you hear from the refugees that their single biggest concern is being reunited with their loved ones who are perhaps across the border with Somalia. How would you engineer a quick fix through solutions, through technological solutions? How would you go about that, and how could your friends and colleagues help?
But there is no quick fix. But
Right.
there needs to be a lot of commitment.
Right.
And when you go to Dadaab, you find 800 people that arrive every day. It's the emergency situation. They come malnourished, they come with diseases in a very dramatic situation. You need to have a life-saving strategy for them. And family tracing is very important for immediately allow them to know where they are and where are their near members of the family. But you have people in Dadaab since 20 years ago. And there, of course, the needs are different. You need to make sure that they are trained, that they are prepared for the future, if the future one day will allow them to go back to their country. And so we have centers for technological access in which training in information technology is a crucial aspect in their preparation for that future. But we have at the same time to try to use technology in instruments to improve their lives. For instance, in Kenya, today you can do all banking operations through a mobile phone. Cash grants or microcredit is an excellent instrument for self-reliance of people. Again, you can use mobile devices for this kind of support. And the truth is that the mobile devices are probably the most democratic technological invention in the world since the beginning
Why do you
of
say
the
that?
world. Because it is something to which everybody has access in today's world, from the rich to the poor, from the most privileged to the most destitute. And I believe refugees are the most vulnerable of the vulnerable. And even in this context, mobile devices can make a lot of difference.
Hans, let's say the phone rings from Dadaab and it's António on the end of the line.
Yeah.
How would you mobilize your staff and your people, and how quickly could you do it? And what are the factors that you would take into sort of, building a tower for connectivity or other issues? How does it work your end?
So on our end, we of course always work with a provider, a big operator in Africa. There are a couple of them, so we will work with them. But we always have people on ground. I mean, we are present in 180 countries, and as Christopher said, I mean, we are going into the most remote areas to putting up radio base stations and putting them live and so on. So we would of course do that quite quickly. I mean, we work in all these countries. We work with different type of challenges. We are doing disaster relief with the Red Cross every time it happens in disaster as well, coming in with telecommunication as the first instant, because that's equally important. But I want to echo something as well. I mean, what we see right now, we're talking a lot here about Refugee United, which is a fantastic thing about reuniting people that have lost each other using fairly simple technology, to be honest, fairly simple technology. But just imagine how it can evolve. How much more you can do when people start to innovate and start using it. And of course, the power of doing a bank account, is enormous when the phone is going to be a bank account compared to people getting a real bank account, a credit line, a phone they have, and they have a currency, which is the data minutes or the voice minute they have. So, and all that will change the thinking about refugee camps and a lot of things, what can be done there, and of course sending information to the refugees about information that is crucial.
Yes, and Christopher, for you, is this in Africa? I mean, of course, SMS is very advanced. So, I mean, do you have for different refugee situations in different parts of the world, different technological solutions, or is SMS almost becoming universal, or is that the way to go? Is that one model that you could apply almost universally?
SMS is, of course, widely understood. Yeah. I mean, I think it's important to focus on technology and realize that in Africa, technology is not necessarily an extension of a person such as it is here. It's a tool. It's something that you use for your livelihood. It's something that illiterates learn how to navigate by using numbers and so on. So technology and mobile phones are great as an enabler. It's not the end-all answer to anything. To think you can just drop off 100,000 phones and then leave people be, and then you come out with literacy and understanding and education is sometimes an idea I see in the West. I mean, you have to apply the technology. You have to use it. You have to get into sort of deep partnerships with organizations such as the UNHCR and ERICSSON from our perspective to fully understand how you best leverage those tools on ground. Then you work with the host community and you see how they operate, how they understand, how they interact, and you keep developing these systems. And from our perspective, what works best in this has been SMS as a notification tool, pushing information with other partners. We also work with the mobile operators to push information to different communities, informing them about our services. We also get a lot of traction with WAP functionality. So WAP is something that people here have probably forgotten all about, the Wireless Applied Protocol. But in the hands of a UNHCR worker in the Dadaab refugee camp, able to capture information on a separated person, and then upload that to our back end, and we push out information about this through SMS to different communities, creates a perfect symbiosis, an ecosystem that, once we get better and better at it, can really help families reconnect and extend beyond that and maybe look into different points and parts such as education, health information, and all these different ideas.
António, in some cases, technology can help find a loved one, but in some cases also, when you use technology, perhaps you've got an answer that a family doesn't want to hear, that they find out, well, that a loved one's gone missing or something really untoward has happened. In that sense, then, does technology, if it doesn't provide solutions, does it at least provide the families closure?
I think that we need to use technology for a purpose. Technology is not good or bad in itself. It depends on the purpose it serves. For instance, in an area of confrontation, we have today in parts of Somalia, but also in parts of Afghanistan, situations in which terrorist organizations, if they capture someone with a mobile phone and they see that there are foreigners in the phone list of the mobile phone, they might kill that person. So, I mean, we need to know how we use these instruments and to do it properly to help people overcome their difficulties. But indeed, the potential is enormous. Going back to Somalia, there are 6 mobile phone operators in Somalia. I was recently at the border between Ethiopia and Somalia, in a remote area of Ethiopia. There was no coverage in the Ethiopian side. I went into the Somali side, and in that remote area of Somalia, there was coverage from a Somali operator, which means that the potential to use this kind of instrument in today's world, even in the most remote and complex areas, is enormous. You just need to be careful and know in some situations you can use it, in other situations you cannot. But that's exactly why we work together. That's exactly why it's so important to have NGOs like Refugees United that is expert on family tracing and able to know how to connect and when to connect, and to have organizations like ours that have a clear idea that in some areas this is an instrument you cannot use because it might be dangerous for humanitarian workers or even for the families.
Christopher, your favorite story in terms of reuniting a family or families, rack the mind a bit if you can for us and share that with us, and how did it work for you and what did it mean for you as a human being and as an individual? What did it do to you?
That's kind of hard to put into words because I'll dip into the platitudes for that one, but let me try. A month and a half ago, I was in Dadaab, and I was around working with
Dadaab is the
refugee
camp in Kenya.
450,000 people, and I was out working with our field staff and working with the UNHCR and so on, and I caught wind at that point of a family that had just been reunited through our platform. And I jumped into our Jeep and I went out to a camp a part of Dadaab called Hakadera, and I went into C
There
block.
are three different parts of the Dadaab camp. It's so big.
Dagaheli, Ifo 1 and 2, and then Hakadera. And I came to this camp, and I had to sort of plow through and then come up to this block called C20 where I had to ask around, and I was led to this house of a Somali woman who then sat with me and explained to me that 18 years prior, her husband at that point had taken their 2 daughters and gone off to Switzerland. From Switzerland, he'd made it to Geneva, and then from Geneva to Germany. In Germany, for some odd reason, he was deported, leaving the 2 daughters behind. At the same time, the mother was transported to Dadaab to seek refuge. She had lost all contact with the father and hence the children, and they, of course, lost all contact both with the father and the mother. Our staff, with support, were able to bring her onto our platform. And within 30 minutes, she had reconnected with that daughter that she hadn't seen in 18 years, who was last 1 year old when she'd seen her. Through that connection, she was reconnected to the other daughter who had emigrated to the U.S. And within 30 to 40 minutes, pictures had been emailed between us and the UNHCR, had been shared with the family, and we had them on the phone line to talk and explain the situation. Problem was, the daughters no longer spoke Somali, so they had only the voices to listen to. But to be there in that moment, to sit with a family separated for 18 years and discover how, in the sense of a second, through mobile technologies, you're able to connect across 10,000 kilometers and rejoin a family is probably one of the most powerful things I will ever witness. And you sit with a person who cannot talk from sheer happiness. You sit with somebody who is constantly just laughing and being giddy like a 7-year-old kid. And yeah, you know what, when that happens, you kind of step back and you say, I could do this for 100 years for just one reconnection, it'd be all worth it.
It makes the work worthwhile. Hans, you're very moved by this. Share your thoughts.
No, he told the story. No, I think that this is really what moves me. I mean, it's a fantastic technology which our employees in our company just feel great about every day to come to work.
And I can second that. I have had so many Ericsson employees come up to me and share their pleasure at working with Refugees United, with UNHCR, and feeling like they contribute to something of a very deep and meaningful nature to everybody. Because the one thing about Refugees United, I think, that everyone in this room can relate to as well, is the fact that it may be abstract to have to flee from a political situation by having to flee from persecution, but everybody has family, and everybody can understand what it means to be separated from your children or your siblings or your parents, if for just 1 minute. And that brings a very tangible or very sort of concrete understanding of what refugees must endure.
Antonio, your reactions to this story, and obviously for you, some of these experiences must be heightened because you deal with not just one, but tens of thousands of families, feeding them, nourishing them, and of course, reuniting them.
But you know, the most noble part of our job is to help people go back home, voluntarily and in safety and dignity. And for this, not only it's very important to have this tracing mechanism working, but then just to see families being physically reunited. I mean, I remember once traveling from Uganda to South Sudan with a group of families. And then to see families being reunited, physically reunited, you can't imagine the joy in their eyes. And then you feel that it's worth what you are doing and that it makes sense. So I believe that the most important part of this job that we do together in different ways is to make people that is suffering enormously have a life as normal as possible, as close as possible to our life. And one thing that is for me essential with my children, with my grandchildren, with my mother, is to be able to connect and to be able to be together. And this is exactly what I believe unites us in this common work.
The last part of our conversation, we've all talked about technology as an enabler, as a solution provider, but let's take the bigger picture. In the 90s, we had a drought and then a big famine. We've had it here again in the Horn of Africa. Antonio, what long-term solutions should be put on the table? How can we help these countries? And you know, when I say help, not just getting relief and blankets and food out to them, but how can they manage the situation better long term?
But I think that the biggest problem of the international community is that the international community is relatively good reacting, but it's not good preventing. Probably because when you prevent something, you are dealing with something that has not happened. So the media is not there. And if the media is not there, the public opinions are not seized, and then parliaments are not seized, and governments will not act. But indeed, the biggest challenge for today's world, when we all know that these things are going to be repeated. I mean, climate change is making these problems worse and worse every year. We know that in 2 years' time there will be a similar situation in Somalia if nothing is done. What I believe needs, and this kind of networking is very important for that, is to make people understand that it's not only when we see on television a drama occurring or people being killed, it's when we have the capacity to do what is necessary to create resilience, to promote adaptation from climate change, to prevent conflict. This is what matters if we want to avoid this kind of situations.
Hans, what would you say about more environmental protection? Because many of these countries in the Horn of Africa, their forests have been decimated, water tables have been destroyed. So if you can have massive replantation drives, you can plant forests like Ethiopia has done, at least to some extent, then these ravages of nature are sometimes minimized, are they not?
Yes, and I would see two things. I mean, one is, of course, I mean, the drought is extremely complicated things to solve. But I think one thing is, of course, getting better prediction on weather, which you can actually do by using the radio base station and putting weather stations in them. So in order to get a better understanding. The other thing, which I think is so important, the world will triplicate its GDP to 2050. That's the prediction. And that means that we're going to have 3 times as many cars and all of that. That will not fly. The CO2 emission on this earth will be enormous. And I think one of the solutions, not all the solutions, is ICT. If we can use these technologies that now cover 90% of the Earth population by using smarter way of driving, smarter drive on transporting, smarter way of doing power grids by using wireless and broadband, I think that's where I see it, and that should enable us not needing all this shoveling of forests, etc. I know it sounds like a great thing, but I'm convinced that technology can have a play on the CO2 emission and the greenhouse gas as well.
So what, Hans, you're saying is look at technology not only to provide solutions when something happens, but look at technology
now.
Also, as António said, in the cause of prevention. Christopher, is that a sentiment you'd agree with? And if you do, why?
Well, of course. I think that bigger and deeper understanding of the predicaments 43 million people are going through right now would serve everybody. If you look at the world and the situation in the Horn of Africa, we're dealing with 750,000 people. That's 750,000 people out of 43 million who are currently displaced. It's almost, I'd say, a drop in the ocean. We have prolonged, protracted situation across the world that deserves the same amount of attention because every last person out of those 43 million are going through the exact same hardships just to carve out an existence for themselves. We need to understand this much better, and we need to work to really familiarize ourselves with the situation so we can prevent it from happening moving forward.
We'll end on a quick sentence from all our 3 distinguished panelists. António, a quick message to those who are out there in the camps and who are still leaving and fleeing their homes. What would you say to them to build their hope right here, now? A message to them.
The message is exactly that one. Keep your hope. Because it's the hope that has allowed them to survive in those extremely difficult circumstances. And you can't imagine how people are resilient, how people can endure suffering, and how people can always be ready to start again.
Hans.
I think cross-sectoral sort of work will be one of the hopes, that we can sit there from 3 totally different type of organizations but have a common goal, and we all have different type of governance and so on, but we all see the power of doing this. I think that is a hope, and we need to do it more, public, private sector. That's the only way to make it.
Thank you. Christopher, last word to you.
Last word would be a thank you, I think, to ERICSSON and the UNHCR for this, because I think we're seeing a perfect synergy between the infrastructure of a big organization like the UNHCR, the technical know-how of ERICSSON, and the mission of Refugees United come together in, I'd say, an almost unprecedented partnership that looks poised to help a lot of families reconnect. So, thank you.
I thank you all. Thank you for the great work you do. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude this by then saying, let hope be alive, because that's what those wonderful men, women, and children out there in Horn of Africa need most. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.